They didn't knock. They didn't call. They didn't even wait for daylight. They just took my truck. The first thing I heard was metal dragging across concrete, a sharp, grinding sound that didn't belong in a quiet neighborhood at 5:12 in the morning, and before my eyes even adjusted, I could smell it. Diesel, cold and heavy, hanging in the air like something already decided. I stepped out onto my driveway in boots I hadn't even laced up yet, and there it was, my truck, my Ford F-250, halfway lifted, chains tied around the axle, the front end already rising like it was being pulled out of my life 1 inch at a time. The amber lights from the tow truck cut across the yard, flashing against the garage door, catching on the old scratches in the paint that I knew like scars on my own hands. And standing just beyond the beam, perfectly still, like she'd been waiting for this moment, was Vanessa Whitmore. Bright fuchsia blazer, clipboard tucked under her arm. That same smile she always wore at HOA meetings, the kind that looks polite until you realize it's already made up its mind about you. I remember the way the gravel crunched under my boots as I walked closer, the cold biting through my shirt, and the way my breath came out slow, controlled, because yelling wouldn't change anything. "You can't take that," I said, keeping my voice steady, even though I could feel something tightening in my chest. The driver didn't even look at me. He just nodded toward her. Vanessa flipped a page like she was reading off a grocery list. "Commercial vehicles are no longer permitted to be visible overnight," she said, smooth and practiced, like she'd rehearsed it in a mirror. "This is enforcement." I looked at the paper in her hand, the one she held just out of reach, and I caught something most people would have missed, the effective date printed right there at the top. Tomorrow. Not today. Tomorrow. Which meant this wasn't enforcement. This was a decision. And they made it without me. I took a step closer, close enough to see the reflection of those flashing lights in her eyes, and for a second, I thought about everything sitting inside that truck. The toolboxes, the spools of wire, the voltage tester I'd used just yesterday, the worn leather notebook my dad kept in the glove compartment with his handwriting still pressed into the pages. That truck wasn't decoration. It wasn't clutter. It was how I paid for this house. It was how I kept the lights on, literally and figuratively. And now it was hanging in the air like it didn't belong here. Vanessa tilted her head just slightly, like she was offering me a lesson instead of taking something from me. "This is a premium community, Mr. Turner," she said. "We have standards." I let that sit for a second. Standards. I looked past her, down the street lined with identical mailboxes and trimmed hedges, at houses wired, heated, repaired, and maintained by people driving trucks just like mine. And that's when it clicked. Not loud, not dramatic, just a quiet, solid realization settling into place. This wasn't about rules. This was about what she thought people like me looked like, and what she wanted them to look like instead. The chain tightened. The truck lifted higher, and I didn't raise my voice. I didn't argue. I just stood there, hands in my pockets, watching them take the one thing that made all of this possible. Because right then, in that cold morning air, with diesel burning my nose and metal ringing in my ears, I understood something she didn't. She thought she was removing a problem. What she didn't know was she'd just given me a reason. And just down the road, sitting empty and forgotten, was the one piece of land that was about to change everything. I stood there for a long minute after the tow truck turned the corner, long enough for the diesel smell to fade and the morning to start pretending like nothing had happened. And then I went back inside because standing in an empty driveway does not get your tools back or your day started. The house felt different without that truck out front, quieter in the wrong way, like something essential had been pulled out of the routine. My name is Caleb Turner, and for the last 22 years I have been an electrician, the kind that shows up before sunrise, the kind that fixes what stops working when everyone else is asleep. And that truck they just hauled off is not just a vehicle. It is my shop, my office, my supply chain, and most days, it is the only reason the bills get paid on time. I poured coffee that had gone cold on the counter, took one sip anyway, and grabbed my keys out of habit before remembering there was nothing left outside to unlock. And that is when Eli came down the stairs, still half asleep, hoodie on, hair sticking up in the back like he had not quite decided to wake up yet. He looked past me, out through the kitchen window, and I watched it register on his face in real time. "Where is the truck?" he asked, simple, direct, like kids do when they expect a normal answer. I leaned against the counter, crossed my arms, tried to keep it steady. "They towed it," I said. He frowned, stepped closer to the glass like maybe it was just parked at a different angle. Why? That question sat heavier than it should have. I could have said rules. I could have said HOA policy. But none of that would have made sense to a 17-year-old who had spent his weekends handing me tools, learning how to strip wire clean, how to check a breaker without guessing. So I told him the truth the way I understood it. Because they think it does not belong here. He turned and looked at me, really looked this time, not confused anymore, just trying to understand something bigger than a parking rule. It is your truck, he said. You fix their houses with that thing. I nodded. Yeah, I do. He shook his head slow, like he was trying to line that up in his mind, and it just would not fit. So what? They want the lights to work, but they do not want to see how. I let out a breath I did not realize I was holding, because that was about as close as you could get to the truth without sitting him down for a long conversation about how people separate comfort from the work that makes it possible. Something like that, I said. He leaned against the counter across from me, arms folded, mirroring me without even thinking about it. That is messed up, Dad. I gave a small nod. Yeah, it is. There was a moment there, quiet. Just the hum of the refrigerator and the distant sound of a lawn sprinkler kicking on somewhere down the street. And I could feel that old instinct creeping in, the one that tells you to keep your head down, follow the rules, do not make waves, because that is how you keep things stable. It is how I bought this place in the first place. Maple Ridge Estates was supposed to be that reset, that clean start after everything else fell apart. A place where Eli could finish high school without bouncing around, where I could take steady jobs, pay the mortgage, keep things simple. I had read every page of those HOA bylaws before I signed. Every line about paint colors and fence height and trash can placement, because I'm the kind of guy who does not like surprises when it comes to rules, and nowhere in there did it say that the work you do for a living could make you unwelcome. But standing there in that kitchen, looking at my son trying to make sense of it, I realized something that had not fully clicked out in the driveway. This was not about the truck being in the wrong place. This was about the wrong kind of life being too visible. And that is a different kind of problem, because you cannot fix it with a wrench or a new part or a quick patch job. You either accept it or you change something bigger. Eli pushed off the counter and grabbed his backpack. So what are you going to do? He asked, like he already knew I was not the kind of man who lets someone else decide how I make a living. I looked out the window one more time at that empty stretch of concrete where my truck had been for the last 3 years, every early morning, every late night, every job in between, and I thought about the way Vanessa said standards like it was something clean and simple, something you could write on paper and enforce with a signature. I picked up my phone, already thinking 3 steps ahead, already running through options in my head the way I do on a job site when something does not add up. I am going to get my truck back, I said first, because that part was non-negotiable. Then I grabbed my jacket, keys still in my hand, even if they did not open anything outside right now, and headed for the door. And after that, I added, more to myself than to him, I am going to make sure nobody ever has to hide their work just to live here. He watched me for a second, then nodded once, like that made sense, like that was the answer he was hoping for. And as I stepped out into that same quiet street, the one that looked so perfect from a distance, I could still hear that chain tightening in my head, still see the way that truck lifted off the ground, and I knew this was not going to be about parking anymore. This was going to be about who gets to belong, and who decides what that looks like. I found my truck sitting behind a chain-link fence on the edge of an impound lot that smelled like rust, old rubber, and hot asphalt baked into the ground for years, the kind of place where everything looked forgotten even when it was not. And for a second, I just stood there with my hands on the fence, fingers curled into cold metal, looking at it like I was checking on something alive. The sun had barely cleared the tops of the warehouses, casting that flat early morning light that shows every dent, every scratch, every bit of dust. And there it was, my Ford sitting between a busted sedan and a work van with a cracked windshield, still carrying yesterday's job in the bed, ladders tied down tight, toolboxes locked, just waiting like it expected me to show up. The guy in the office slid the paperwork across the counter without looking up from his screen. $285 for the tow, 1-day storage, he said, like he had said it 1,000 times already that morning. I pulled out my wallet, paid it without arguing, because arguing does not get your tools back any faster. And as he stamped the receipt, I asked him one question that had been sitting in my head since dawn. They give you the go-ahead on this before the rule even kicked in? He finally looked up then, shrugged like it was none of his business. We just follow the call, man. HOA signs off, we move it. Simple as that. I took the keys, walked back out, and when I opened that driver's side door, the smell hit me the same way it always did, a mix of rubber, metal, and a little bit of coffee that had spilled into the cup holder months ago. And for the first time since that chain tightened around the axle, I felt something settle. This was still mine. I started the engine, listened to it turn over clean, steady, familiar, and sat there for a second longer than I needed to, just letting that sound drown out everything else. But the problem did not stay behind that fence. It followed me right back through the gates of Maple Ridge like it had been waiting. By the time I pulled into the neighborhood, I could see it already, envelopes tucked into mailboxes, a few neighbors standing at the end of driveways holding papers in their hands, reading, rereading, the way people do when something does not feel right. I parked at the curb for a minute instead of pulling into my own driveway, just watching, and then Miguel Reyes stepped out from across the street, holding his notice up like it might explain itself if he looked at it long enough. "You get one of these?" he asked as I got out. I nodded once. "Yeah, got the deluxe version." He let out a short laugh that did not have much humor in it. "They hit me for 3 days already. Said my ladder rack makes it commercial." He tapped the paper with 2 fingers. "I fix roofs, man. That is kind of the whole point." I glanced down at his truck, parked exactly where it had been for the last 2 years. Nothing different except now it had a problem attached to it. "They are going after all of us," I said. He looked around, lowered his voice a little. "You see Janet's van? They flagged her too. Home health nurse. She parks that thing and goes straight to taking care of people, and somehow that is a violation now." That is when I noticed her, 2 houses down, standing by her van with her phone in her hand, talking fast, pacing, trying to figure out what to do. There was a pattern here, and it was not subtle once you saw it. Trucks, vans, anything that looked like. Work got a notice. Everything else stayed quiet. Miguel shook his head, looked back at me. "What are you going to do?" That question again. I leaned against my truck, crossed my arms, feeling the weight of the keys still in my hand. "First thing, I am not paying them to tell me my job does not belong here," I said. "Second thing, I am going to read every line they think backs this up." He nodded slowly, like he was hoping that would lead somewhere solid. "You think there is something in there?" I looked down at the paper he handed me, scanned the language, the way it danced around specifics, words like aesthetic standards and visual impact, nothing clean, nothing direct. "There always is," I said. "People who write rules like this leave themselves room to move. That means they leave room for someone else too." He folded his notice back up, tucked it into his pocket. "Man, I just want to park my truck and go to work," he said. I pushed off the side of my own truck, looked down the street one more time at all those clean driveways, all those quiet houses, and the people inside them who depended on work they did not want to see. "Yeah," I said. "So do I." And as I walked back toward my house, I could feel it building, not loud, not angry, just steady, like current running through a wire you know is live. This was not one tow, one fine, one bad morning. This was a system, and systems do not fix themselves. But they can be rerouted if you know where to look. By the time the sun dipped low that evening, the street looked normal again if you did not know what to look for, but once you saw it, you could not unsee it. Driveways that used to hold trucks were suddenly empty. Vans were gone. Ladders disappeared. It was like someone had quietly erased a whole category of people from the picture, and the only thing left was the illusion that everything still worked the same. I sat at my kitchen table with those notices spread out in front of me, mine, Miguel's, a copy Janet had dropped off, and 2 more from guys I barely knew but who had heard I was looking into it. The paper felt cheap, thin, but the words on it carried weight, written just vague enough to sound official without ever saying anything straight. I traced one line with my finger again, "Vehicles deemed to negatively impact community appearance," and let out a slow breath. "Deemed by who?" I said out loud, more to the room than anyone else. Eli was across from me, elbows on the table, reading over my shoulder. "That could mean anything," he said. "Exactly," I answered. "And that is the point." I pulled out the HOA binder I had kept since closing on the house, thick, tabbed, every section marked the way I mark wiring diagrams on a job, because I do not like guessing when something matters. I flipped through pages until I found the section they were leaning on, architectural standards, community aesthetics, All the language that sounds clean until you try to apply it to something real. No mention of work trucks. No definition of commercial vehicle beyond signage exceeding a certain size, and even that had exceptions buried 2 pages later. I tapped the paper. They are stretching this, I said. Eli leaned in closer. So they are wrong. I shook my head slightly. Not exactly. They are flexible. That is the problem with rules written by people who want control. They do not break them. They bend them until they point where they want. My phone buzzed on the table, and when I picked it up, it was a group message Miguel had started. A handful of numbers I recognized, a few I did not. Pictures started coming through, more notices, more fines, timestamps showing they were issuing them early in the morning, late at night, whenever it caught people off guard. One message popped up from Janet. They said if I do not move my van by Friday, they will escalate. Another from a guy named Ron. I got hit for 4 days at once. How is that even possible? I set the phone down, rubbed my thumb along the edge of the paper, feeling that same steady current building again. This was not random. This was organized. I stood up, grabbed my jacket, and told Eli, "Come on." He looked up. "Where are we going?" I headed for the door. To hear it from them. The clubhouse lights were already on when we pulled up, bright through the windows, casting long reflections across the parking lot that, I noticed, was full of perfectly clean SUVs and sedans, not a single work truck in sight. Inside, it smelled like fresh carpet cleaner and something sweet, like they wanted the place to feel polished down to the air itself. Vanessa was at the front, mid-sentence, talking to a small group of residents who nodded along like everything made sense. The fuchsia jacket stood out under the overhead lights, sharp, intentional. I did not wait for an invitation. I walked straight up, Eli a step behind me, and when she noticed me, that smile clicked into place again like a switch. "Mr. Turner," she said, "I assume you have questions." I held up the notice. "Yeah," I said. "I have a few." The room went quieter, not silent, but close enough that people started paying attention without meaning to. I tapped the date at the top of the page. "You enforced this before it even went into effect." She did not miss a beat. "The board approved early enforcement due to compliance concerns," she said, smooth as ever. I nodded slowly. "And this part," I continued, pointing to the line about visual impact. "Where exactly does it say a work truck is a violation?" She clasped her hands together, tilted her head just a little. "We have to consider the overall presentation of the neighborhood," she said. "Large utility vehicles can be disruptive to that standard." I let that hang there for a second, then asked the question that had been sitting in my chest since this started. Disruptive to who? That landed differently. A couple of people shifted. One man near the back crossed his arms. Vanessa's smile tightened just enough that you could see it if you were looking for it. "To the community as a whole," she said. I glanced around the room, at the faces, at the people who lived in the houses I wired, the outlets I fixed, the panels I upgraded, and I realized something right there in that clean, quiet space. They were not all on her side. Some of them just had not spoken yet. I lowered the paper, met her eyes again. "You know," I said, keeping my voice level, "those trucks you were trying to get rid of, they are the reason this place works the way it does." She opened her mouth like she was about to respond, but I did not give her the space. "Roofs, wiring, heating, plumbing. You do not see it, but you use it every day." The room stayed quiet. Vanessa straightened her posture, that confidence snapping back into place. "We are simply maintaining standards, Mr. Turner," she said. I nodded once, because I understood now. Not just what she was doing, but how far she was willing to push it. "All right," I said. "Then I guess I will have to find somewhere that meets your standards." I turned, walked out before she could answer, Eli right behind me. And as we stepped back into the night air, cooler now, quieter, I could feel that shift settle in. They had drawn a line, clean and polished and carefully worded. What they did not realize was that lines go both ways. And just outside their boundary, there was a whole lot of space they did not control. The next morning did not come with answers. It came with silence, the kind that settles in when a decision has already been made somewhere above you, and all you can do is live under it. I sat in my truck with the engine off at the edge of my own driveway, hands resting on the steering wheel, watching the neighborhood wake up without me being part of it the same way anymore. A sprinkler clicked on across the street, birds moved along the fence line, and everything looked exactly how Vanessa wanted it to look, clean, quiet, controlled. But behind that, I knew what it cost now. I started the engine, backed out slow, and instead of heading to my first job, I turned the other way, out past the entrance, past the sign that read Maple Ridge Estates in polished stone like it was something permanent. About 400 yards down the road, just outside the HOA boundary, sat St. Mark's Chapel, or what was left of it. The building leaned just slightly, like time had been pressing on it from one side. The paint faded, the windows dusty, and the parking lot cracked wide enough in places for weeds to push through like they were reclaiming it inch by inch. I had driven past it 100 times without really seeing it, just another empty place in a town that had moved on, but now I slowed down, pulled in, and let the tires roll over that uneven asphalt until I came to a stop in the middle of it. It was quiet out there, different from the neighborhood quiet, less controlled, more honest. I stepped out, boots hitting the ground, and took a slow look around. There was space here, more than enough, rows of faded lines still visible under the cracks, a layout that had once held Sunday crowds, now just holding nothing. Eli got out on the other side, hands in his hoodie pocket, looking around like he was trying to figure out why we were there. "This place is closed, right?" he asked. I nodded. "Has been for a while." He kicked at a loose piece of gravel, glanced back at the road. "So why are we here?" I did not answer right away. Instead, I walked a few steps farther out, turned in a slow circle, measuring without a tape, the way you do when you have been working long enough to see dimensions without numbers. 18 spots easy, maybe 20 if you tightened it up. Good distance from the road, no houses right up against it, and most important, not part of Maple Ridge. I looked back at him. "Because this is not their property," I said. He frowned slightly. "Okay." I could see it clicking in his head, just not all the way yet. I pointed back toward the entrance we had just driven through. "Everything inside that sign, they control. Outside it, they do not." He followed my finger, then looked back at the lot, then at me. "You are thinking." I let a small smile pull at the corner of my mouth, not because it was funny, but because for the first time since that chain tightened around my axle, something felt like it could move. "I am thinking they drew their line real clear," I said, "and they forgot to look at what sits right next to it." He took a few steps out into the lot, looked down at the cracked paint, then back up at me. "You mean like parking?" I nodded once. "Legal parking." He let out a low whistle, slow, like he was seeing it now. "For trucks." "For work," I corrected, because that was the part that mattered. I walked over to the old sign near the front, the one that still had a weathered "for sale" notice hanging crooked on it. The phone number faded, but still readable if you got close enough. I ran my thumb along the edge of it, felt the rough wood, the years of sun and rain baked into it. This place had been something once. It had held people, purpose, a reason to gather. Now it was just sitting, waiting for someone to decide what it was worth. My phone came out of my pocket almost without thinking, and I snapped a picture of the sign, zoomed in on the number, and then another of the lot, wide angle, capturing the space the way I saw it in my head, not the way it looked right now. Eli watched me, then shook his head slightly, a grin starting to form. "You are serious," he said. I looked at the screen, then back up at the empty rows of cracked asphalt. "Yeah," I said. "I am." He laughed once under his breath, not mocking, just surprised. "Man, they are not going to like that." I slipped the phone back into my pocket, took one more look around, and for a second, I could almost hear it. Engines idling, doors shutting, people stepping out ready to work, not hiding, not apologizing. "No," I said. "They are not." And as we got back into the truck, the engine turning over steady, familiar, I knew this was the part where most people back off, find a workaround, stay quiet. But I have never been good at pretending something is fine when it is not. They wanted clean lines, clear views, no reminders of how things actually get built and fixed and kept running. Fine. I would give them exactly that. Just not the way they expected. I made the call from the truck with the engine idling. The number half faded on the sign, but still clear enough once you dialed it. And it rang longer than I expected, long enough that I almost thought nobody would pick up, but then a voice came through, older, steady, the kind that does not rush. "Hello." I shifted in the seat, glanced once at the chapel in the side mirror. "Hi, my name is Caleb Turner. I am calling about this St. Mark's property." There was a pause, not suspicious, just careful. "You are not a developer, are you?" she asked. I let out a small breath. "No, ma'am. Electrician." Another pause, shorter this time. "That is already better. she said, and I could hear something soften on the other end. We set a time to meet that afternoon, and when I pulled back into that lot a few hours later, the light had changed, warmer now, catching the edges of the building in a way that made it look less forgotten and more like it was just waiting for the right hands. She was already there when we arrived, standing near the front steps, small frame, silver hair pulled back, wearing a cardigan that looked like it had seen years of real use. "You must be Caleb," she said as I walked up. I nodded, offered my hand. "Yes, ma'am. This is my son, Eli." She shook his hand too, firm, direct. "Ruth Keller," she said. "I used to help run things here, back when it was still open." We walked the property together, slow, no rush, and she told us about it as we went. How the parking lot used to fill up on Sundays, how they ran a food pantry out of the side room, how during storms people would come here when the power went out because someone always knew how to keep things running. I listened, really listened, because places like this do not just sit empty without a reason. And if you are going to change something, you better understand what it used to be. We stopped near the middle of the lot, the cracks running in long lines under our feet, weeds pushing through like they had been waiting their turn. "Developer offered to buy it last year," Ruth said, looking out over it. "Storage units. Said it would be efficient." She smiled a little, but it did not reach her eyes. I told him efficient is not the same as useful. I nodded slowly. "I agree with that." She turned to me then, studied me for a second like she was measuring something you cannot write down. "So what do you want to do with it, Mr. Turner?" That was the question that mattered, and I did not rush it. I looked out across the lot again, pictured it the way I had earlier, trucks lined up clean, space used, purpose restored. "I want to keep it working," I said. Not the way it was exactly, but close enough that it still helps people. She raised an eyebrow slightly. "How?" I shifted my weight, hands in my pockets, speaking plain. "There is a neighborhood up the road," I said. "They just decided people like me cannot park where we live if our vehicles look like work. Electricians, roofers, nurses, anyone who actually keeps things running." She did not interrupt, just listened. "This lot is outside their control," I continued. "I could buy it, clean it up, mark it out, make it a place where those trucks can park legally, safely, without being treated like they do not belong." Eli stepped a little closer beside me, nodding as I spoke, like he had already bought into it. Ruth looked between us, then back at the lot. "And the building?" she asked. I did not hesitate. "We keep part of it open," I said. "Weekend workshops. Basic repairs for people who need it. Maybe classes for kids who want to learn a trade. Nothing fancy, just useful." The word hung there, and I could see it land with her. She walked a few steps away, looked back at the chapel doors, then at the parking lot, and I gave her the space to think, because decisions like this should not be rushed into a handshake. After a minute, she turned back. "I did not want this place turned into something that only makes money," she said. "It used to make a difference." I nodded. "It still can." She studied me one more time, then gave a small, decisive nod. "All right," she said. "If you are serious, I will sell. But you keep that promise about making it useful." I met her gaze, steady. "Yes, ma'am. I will." We shook hands right there in the middle of that cracked asphalt. No contracts yet, no paperwork. Just an agreement built on something simpler than all that. As we walked back toward the truck, Eli leaned in close and said under his breath, "You are really doing this." I glanced at him, then back at the lot, already running through permits, cleanup, lines, lighting, everything it would take to turn an idea into something real. "Yeah," I said. "I am." And for the first time since that early morning chain cut through my routine, I did not feel like I was reacting anymore. I was building something. The paperwork moved faster than I expected, not because it was simple, but because I treated it like a job that mattered, every line checked, every requirement handled before it could slow me down, and within 2 weeks I was standing in that same lot again. Only now it was mine, not on a handshake anymore, but on paper, signed, filed, recorded. The first morning we started cleaning it up, the sun had not even cleared the trees, and already there was the sound of a push broom scraping across asphalt, steady, rhythmic, cutting through the quiet. Eli was out there with me, sleeves rolled up, moving debris into piles, kicking loose gravel into the cracks, the two of us working side by side the way we always had. No need for a lot of talking, because the work itself filled the space. By mid-morning, Miguel pulled in, stepped out of his truck, looked around, and let out a low whistle. You actually did it, he said, shaking his head like he was still catching up to the idea. I leaned on the broom for a second. Not done yet, I said. But it will be. He grabbed a shovel from the back of his truck without being asked and got to work on a section where the weeds had taken over, like he understood exactly what this place needed to become. That is how it started. No announcement, no big reveal, just people showing up, picking up tools, and turning something neglected into something that worked again. We painted lines over the old faded ones, clean, straight, measured out to fit real trucks, not just compact cars. We fixed the lighting, replaced broken fixtures, ran new wiring where it had gone bad. And when the lights came on that first night, casting a steady glow across the lot, it felt different, like the place had woken up. I ordered signs, simple, clear, nothing flashy, and the day they arrived, Eli helped me mount the first one near the entrance. He held it steady while I drove the bolts in, metal ringing against metal, the sound sharp and certain. When I stepped back, we both looked at it for a second. Turner Community Trade Lot, he read out loud. Underneath it, in smaller letters, the line I had pulled straight from my father's old notebook, the one that had been riding in my glove compartment all those years. Clean work. Safe parking. Respect for all trades. Eli nodded once, like that was exactly what it should say. The first evening we opened it up, there were 5 trucks. Mine, Miguel's, Janet's van, Ron's HVAC truck, and one I did not recognize at first, a guy named Chris who had heard about it through a friend. They pulled in one by one, slow, careful, like they were not sure if this was real yet, like they expected someone to step out and tell them to leave. I walked each one of them through the layout, showed them where to park, explained the rules, no noise after 9, keep it clean, no dumping anything, treat it like it matters. They all nodded, no pushback, because when something finally works in your favor, you do not try to break it. Miguel shut his door, looked around the lot, then back at me. Feels strange, he said. I tilted my head. How so? He shrugged slightly. Not having to worry about where I park my truck. I let out a small breath, glanced across the rows, the lines we had just painted still bright under the lights. Yeah, I said. It should not feel strange. The next night, there were 9 trucks. Then 12. Word moved faster than anything I could have planned. People talked, shared, passed it along to the next guy who got a notice, the next person who did not want to pay a fine just for doing their job. And then, right on schedule, the reaction came. It started with a car pulling into the lot just before sunset, not to park, but to look. Vanessa stepped out, that same fuchsia jacket catching the light, clipboard in hand like it gave her authority even out here. She walked a few steps in, heels clicking against the asphalt we had just cleaned, and looked around like she was inspecting something she did not approve of. I walked over, kept my pace even. Evening, I said. She turned, that smile already in place. Mr. Turner, she replied. I was wondering how long it would take before you improvised. I glanced around the lot, at the trucks lined up clean, engines off, no noise, no mess, just people. Stepping out and heading home. Does not look like a problem to me, I said. Her eyes moved over everything, searching for something she could point at. You are creating a commercial operation adjacent to a residential community, she said. I nodded once. On commercial property, I answered. With permits. That landed. Just enough. Her smile tightened, just like it had before. We will see about that, she said. I held her gaze, calm, steady, the way you do when you know exactly where you stand. Yeah, I said. We will. She turned, walked back to her car, and drove off without another word. But I could feel it. The shift, the pressure building again, not on us this time, but on her. Because this time, she was the one standing outside the line she had drawn, and everything she tried next would have to cross it. It did not take long for her to make the next move, and when it came, it did not come quietly. The first sign was a white SUV rolling slowly into the lot just after lunch. Not Vanessa this time, but a man in a button-down shirt stepping out with a clipboard of his own, scanning the area like he was looking for something specific. I was tightening bolts on one of the light fixtures when he walked over, cleared his throat, and said, You the owner here? I wiped my hands on a rag, nodded. Yeah. What can I help you with? He flipped a page, pointed at the ground like the asphalt itself might answer him. Zoning compliance inspection. We received a complaint about unauthorized commercial activity. I almost smiled at that, not because it was funny, but because it was predictable. All right, I said. What do you need to see? He looked a little surprised that I did not argue, but he went through his checklist anyway, asked about permits, usage classification, lighting, drainage, the whole thing. I walked him through everything, showed him the paperwork I had already organized in a folder in the truck, every permit stamped, every requirement met. He took his time, looked at it all, then finally nodded. Looks like you are within code, he said, neutral, professional. Whoever filed this might not have all the information. I gave a small nod. Seems like. That happens a lot. He packed up his clipboard, gave me a polite nod, and left, and I watched that SUV pull out the same way Vanessa had the night before, slow, controlled, but empty-handed. That should have been enough, but it was not. 2 days later, it was the police. Not sirens, not urgency, just a cruiser pulling in at dusk, lights off, rolling steady across the lot until it stopped near the entrance. Officer Brooks stepped out, same calm presence I had seen around town before, the kind of guy who had dealt with enough real problems to recognize when something was not one. Evening, he said as I walked over. Evening, I replied. He glanced around at the rows of trucks, all parked clean, no engines running, no noise, just people locking up and heading out. Got a call about possible disturbance, he said. I raised an eyebrow slightly. You see any disturbance? He shook his head once, almost like he already knew the answer before he got out of the car. No, sir. Looks pretty orderly to me. I nodded toward the trucks. Everyone parks, goes home. No late night activity, no issues. He took another look around, then leaned in just slightly, lowering his voice enough that it stayed between us. You are not breaking any laws, he said. But someone is trying real hard to make it look like you are. I met his eyes, steady. I figured as much. He gave a small nod, straightened up. Well, from what I can see, you are fine. If anything changes, we will let you know. I watched him leave the same way I had watched the inspector, and when the lot settled back into its normal quiet, I could feel it clearer than ever. This was not about fixing a problem. This was about finding one that did not exist. Later that night, after most of the trucks had cleared out, Miguel came over, leaned against the side of his truck, arms crossed. Man, they really do not want this to work, do they? He said. I looked out across the lot, the lights steady, the lines clean, everything exactly the way we had built it. No, I said. They do not. He kicked lightly at the asphalt, then glanced over at me. So what happens next? I thought about that for a second. About the inspections, the calls, the way every move she made came back empty, because it was built on something that was not actually there. Next, I said slowly, they push harder. He let out a breath. And then, I looked back toward the road, toward the entrance of Maple Ridge just visible beyond the trees, that clean line she had drawn still standing there like it meant something absolute. Then they run out of room, I said. And right then, as if on cue, my phone buzzed in my pocket. I pulled it out, saw Miguel's name again in a group thread, but this time it was not a photo of a notice or a complaint. It was a screenshot. I opened it, and there it was, an email chain. Internal, not meant for anyone outside their board. Vanessa's name at the top. Subject line about community image concerns. I read the first line once, then again, slower this time, making sure I was not missing anything. Reducing visible work vehicles will significantly improve buyer perception for upcoming listings. I felt something settle into place, not anger, not even satisfaction, just clarity. This was it. Not standards, not safety, not community, business. I showed Miguel the screen. He let out a low whistle. You kidding me? I shook my head once. No. He looked back at me, eyes sharper now. What are you going to do with that? I locked the phone, slipped it back into my pocket, and looked out across the lot one more time, at the space we had built, the people it was already helping, the thing that had started as a problem and turned into something real. I'm not going to post it online, I said. I'm not going to argue about it in the street. I met his eyes, calm, steady. I am going to bring it right back to where this started. He nodded slowly, like he understood exactly what that meant. And as the last truck pulled out and the lot went quiet again, I knew the next move was not going to be out here. It was going to be inside their own room, under their own lights, with their own rules. The room felt smaller than it should have that night, not because of the walls, but because of what was about to be said inside them. The clubhouse lights were bright, almost too clean, casting everything in that same polished glow Vanessa liked so much. But there was something different in the air this time. More people. More voices before the meeting even started. Not loud, just restless. I walked in with Eli beside me, folder in my hand, and I could feel eyes turning, not all at once, but enough to notice. Vanessa stood at the front like always, fuchsia jacket sharp under the lights, posture straight, expression already set. She saw me the second I stepped in, and for a brief moment, something flickered there. Not fear, not yet, just awareness. The meeting started the way they always did, routine, approval of minutes, small updates, things meant to keep everything moving without friction, but it did not take long before the real topic surfaced. Next item, she said, glancing down at her notes. Ongoing compliance concerns regarding external property use adjacent to the community. There it was, dressed up clean, but everyone knew what she meant. A few heads turned in my direction. I did not move. I waited. She spoke for a minute or two, carefully, choosing words like she always did, talking about preserving standards, protecting values, maintaining consistency. And then she opened the floor. If there are any comments, she said. That was my moment. I stood up slow, not dramatic, just steady, the way I do when I am about to explain something that matters. Yeah, I said. I have a comment. The room quieted, not completely, but enough that you could hear the shift. I walked up to the front, set the folder down on the table in front of her, and opened it one piece at a time. First, the tow receipt with the timestamp. Then the notice with the effective date. Then the copies from Miguel, from Janet, from the others. I did not rush it. I let each page land. You enforced a rule before it went into effect, I said, calm, clear. You applied it selectively. And you called it community standards. Vanessa kept her posture, but that smile had tightened again, just like before. Mr. Turner, we have already addressed. I raised a hand slightly, not to cut her off, just to hold the space. I am not done. That stopped her. Not the gesture, the tone. I reached into the folder one more time and pulled out the printed email, laid it flat on the table, turned it so it faced the room. This is from your internal board communication, I said, about why this rule was pushed. There was a ripple then, quiet but real, people leaning in, eyes scanning the page. I did not read the whole thing out loud. I did not need to. I pointed to one line. Reducing visible work vehicles will significantly improve buyer perception for upcoming listings. I let that sit. No extra words. No explanation. Just the truth in plain text. For a second, nobody said anything. Then a voice from the back, older, steady. So this was about selling houses? Another voice, sharper. Not safety. Vanessa stepped forward, trying to regain control. That email is being taken out of context, she said, but it did not land the way it used to. The room had shifted. I could feel it. I looked around, met a few eyes, not challenging, just present. You all live here, I said. You know who fixes your wiring when something goes out. Who repairs your roofs when the weather turns. Who shows up when things stop working. I paused, let that connect. And now you have been told those same people do not belong in your view. That landed deeper. You could see it in the way people straightened, in the way a few nodded without realizing it. Ruth stood up then, slow but steady, leaning slightly on the chair beside her. This community was built by people who work, she said. Not just people who sell it. That was it. No speech. No drama. Just truth. Vanessa looked around, and for the first time since I had met her, she did not have control of the room. The board members exchanged glances, quiet, uncertain, and then one of them spoke. We need to review this policy, he said. Another nodded. Immediately. The vote was not loud. It did not need to be. Hands went up, decisions made. And just like that, the rule that had started all of this was suspended, pending revision. Vanessa said something about process, about procedure, but it did not carry anymore. The meeting moved on, but the outcome was already set. I closed the folder, picked it up, and stepped back, not waiting for applause, not looking for it. As Eli and I walked out into the night air, cooler now, quieter, he glanced